Welcome to the Project Management Prepcast, the direct route to PMP exam success. Here's your instructor, Cornelius Fichtner.
Hello and welcome back to the PM Prepcast. We are reporting live from the PMP exam testing centres. I'm your instructor, Cornelius Fichtner. The topic of this lesson is your exam score report, but we're also going to review and repeat a few facts from and about the exam as well, so that we're all on the same page. This means that in this lesson we will be reviewing the exam timeline, we'll take another look at the passing score, discuss the number of questions per domain, then we have an FAQ section, about 6 questions and answers that are at the forefront of people's minds when it comes to the score report, and then in the end we're going to take a look at 3 actual score reports from successful students. We begin with the exam timeline, and you may remember this slide here from another lesson where we already presented this in detail to you, so just a brief overview here about this. So the exam basically has 3 segments. The exam itself is preceded by an optional tutorial. It's 15 minutes long, and this will give you some time to calm down, relax, and write down your brain dump sheet. Then, in the middle, we have the actual exam. It lasts 4 hours, but does not have any scheduled breaks. If you do take breaks, then the exam countdown clock just keeps ticking. Also, there will be other people in the room, and there's going to be activity around you. After you are done with the exam, either you click end exam or your time runs out, you will take a survey, which takes another 15 minutes or so. Once you complete the survey, you will see your exam score report on the screen. So much for this very brief review of the timeline to bring us all back together. Next, let's turn our attention to the passing score. And of course, the most surprising statement about the passing score is this: we don't know what the passing score for the exam is. This is because the PMP exam doesn't have a fixed passing score of X%. Instead, PMI says that the passing score for all PMI exams is determined by sound psychometric analysis. Let's look at that. The PMP exam is a 4-hour multiple-choice exam. In these 4 hours, you are going to have to answer 200 questions, and each question has 4 possible answers, A, B, C, and D, and only one of these 4 is correct. Out of these 200 questions, 25 are considered pre-test questions. These pre-test questions, they do not affect your score. PMI uses them as an effective and legitimate way for testing new questions. In other words, new questions for the exam are first tried out in this way to see how well they work. Well, basically you become a guinea pig for PMI so they can test out these new questions on you. Anyway, the pre-test questions are randomly placed throughout the exam, so you don't know which 25 of the 200 you're answering are in fact pre-test question. So this means you're starting out with 200 minus the 25 pre-test questions. That leaves 175 questions that will in fact be scored, and as we have learned on the previous slide, they will be scored based on sound psychometric analysis. But how exactly does PMI do this? Well, we don't know their exact approach, but psychometric analysis is not a PMI invention. It's a scientific approach, so we can make some assumptions here. And as a general rule, PMI training companies around the world, we're assuming the following. Each question is scored on its individual merit. For example, easy questions, they give you a small score, and really, really difficult questions, well, they give you a higher score when you answer them correctly. So everybody's passing score is different based on the difficulty level of the questions you get. Of course, PMI will probably make sure that each exam is roughly of the same difficulty here, but for the sake of explaining this, psychometric scoring means that if you happen to have an exam that is full of easy questions, you are going to have to answer more questions correctly. But if you have an exam full of really, really hard questions, well, you are going to be given more leeway. You have to answer fewer questions correctly because yours are so much more difficult. But again, these are general high-level assumptions based on the theory of psychometric analysis. We do not know the exact approach that PMI has chosen. Also, as a quick reminder, this table shows how the number of questions are divided up on the exam. We have 5 domains: initiating, planning, executing, monitoring, controlling, and closing. And PMI has clearly defined percentages that describe how many questions you will see from that domain. This will give you some indication as to the importance of each of these domains. For example, you should invest about 4 times as much time and effort into studying the executing domain with 30% of the questions than you should do for the closing domain with just 8% of the questions. And now let's answer some of the most pressing questions that you may have, beginning with, well, will I receive a printed score report? And the answer is yes. Upon completion of the computer-based examination, PMI writes, you will receive a printed copy of your test results. In addition to the overall pass-fail status, important diagnostic information on your performance is provided for each domain. This information provides you with a better measurement of your knowledge. And let me just remind you that it's important for you to make sure that you do not leave the testing center without receiving a copy of this score report. We recommend this because there was one student whose electronic exam results were lost, but because he had the printed score report, he was able to prove to PMI that he had been there, that he had passed, and of course he then received his certification. The next question is, what information is provided on the score report? And the answer is that there are 2 levels of information provided. One is just your overall exam result, which tells you whether you have passed or failed the exam. And the other one is the diagnostic representation of your proficiency level in each of the 5 domains. And for each of the 5 domains, you will see whether you are proficient, moderately proficient, or below proficient. And of course, the logical next question is, well, what exactly is this diagnostic representation? What does it mean? Well, proficient means that your performance in this domain is above the average level of knowledge in the domain. Moderately proficient means that you are at an average level in the domain. And of course, below proficient means you are below the general average level of other exam takers in this particular domain. And of course, the one thing that everybody wants to know, will the score report tell me how many questions I had wrong? And the answer here is no. PMI writes about this that they have improved how the diagnostic results are presented in the score report. Instead of percentages or the exact numbers of questions you had right or wrong, PMI is using global best practices in examination administration by using these 3 proficiency levels that we have just seen in the previous answer. Well, and once people realize that they're not going to get the exact numbers, they're only going to get proficient, moderately proficient, and below proficient, the answer is, of course, how on earth can this help me in my professional development? Well, it's quite simple. These proficiency levels, they serve as an aid in measuring how well you are doing in your studies and also in practice. For example, If your result is below proficient in one of these 5 domains, then you know what you have to do. For example, if you are below proficient in initiating, well, you're going to have to study initiation a little bit more for your next exam attempt. And also looking forward, let's say you passed your exam, you're proficient in 4 of the 5 domains, and again, you are below proficient in initiation. This means that you could say to yourself, well, if I'm not really that great at initiating a project, how about if I take a course about developing business cases, a course about creating charters, and this will help you and guide you in your future career. Yeah, okay, but wait a minute. My passing score, whether I pass or fail, now, is this based on the number of questions that I have right? Or, like I have to be proficient in all 5 domains? How exactly does that work? The answer is quite simple. The results are based on the number of correct answers overall. So you do not have to reach a certain proficiency level in each of these 5 domains in order to pass your exam. And you will see that this statement is true once we look at the exam score reports in just a minute or so. Ah, yes, and I've pretty much given this one away on the previous slide already. Do I have to be proficient in every domain in order to pass the exam? And the answer is no. There's no minimum or maximum number of domains in which you have to demonstrate proficiency in order to pass the exam. Your pass-fail rate is really determined based on your overall performance, or not on how many questions you answered right or wrong in a particular domain. And now, the moment that everybody has been waiting for, we're going to take a look at 3 score reports that we have received from successful exam takers. Here we are, the first of our 3 score reports. We're looking at a scanned version, the PDF version of this document. And the first thing you'll notice at the top is this big box there that's covering the PMI logo. We are a PMI registered education provider, and as such we are not allowed to show the PMI logo in our training materials, so we just put a white box over it to hide it. Okay, more importantly, what do we actually see there? So we have here the exam type. It was taken for the project management professional, and this is the examination score report. Application type PMP, and of course we have removed the candidate's name. On the right hand side, we have the candidate's PMI ID number and also the exam date when this was taken. Of course, the most important thing for every candidate is right here in the middle, the overall score, which for this candidate is a pass. And below that, let me scroll down slightly to bring this into the center here. You see on the left the 5 domains: initiating, planning, executing, monitoring, controlling, closing. And then they also have professional and social responsibility. So by this alone, you can tell this is a somewhat older score report where professional and social responsibility was still separate. In the new exam, in the current exam, this is actually integrated. We'll see that in the next 2 of our score reports. You can now see that this particular exam taker was proficient in 4, moderately proficient here in 1, and actually below proficient in the closing domain. And this is really why I am showing you this, even though this is somewhat older with the professional and social responsibility still showing up. So this you will not see on yours anymore. Even if you are below proficient in a domain, it is in fact possible to pass your exam. Scrolling down, there's not really all that much else here on the document. Just a congratulation and then a description of how to read the above. We've looked at this. What does below, moderate, and proficient mean? All right, that's it for this one. Let's move on to the next. Here's our second one, and there are three things that I would like you to notice on this particular score report. First of all, big shift at the very top. You'll notice that the PMI logo is no longer centered. The PLI logo has now moved over to the left. Second, and really more importantly here, you'll notice domain names. We now only have 5 domain names, so this is a relatively new score report that we're seeing here. This person actually passed about 4 weeks before we recorded this lesson. Most importantly, really, on the right, take a look at the results. Moderately proficient in all 5 domains with a pass. So this means you do not have to be proficient in any number of the domains. It is sufficient to pass with moderately proficient in all 5 of the domains. Of course, this student told me, I really wanted to have 3 to 4 of the domains proficient, but in the end I passed and I am still a PMP. And here we are with our third and final score report, and I bet your eyes immediately zoomed into the results here, where we see that we have 2 moderately proficient and 3 proficient, which of course led to a passing score. But frankly, that's not the most important thing on this particular score report. Let me scroll all the way down to the bottom here for you, and then I'm going to zoom into this, and let me bring this a little bit more into the center. And what you now see is that at the testing center, once they printed it, they not only just handed it to this candidate, but they also put an embossed stamp in it and they signed it. So this makes it even more official. And that's it for the review of our 3 exam score reports. If you have already seen our lesson in which we review the day of your PMP exam, then you know all about this warning here on the screen. Don't leave the testing center without a printed score report. This is because it's your only proof that you have passed your exam. If anything goes wrong with the data of your electronic records, then your paper report becomes your means of proving to PMI that you have indeed earned your credential. And with that, we have come to the end of this lesson. So it's time for Justine to say,
it's time to boot and scoot.
And from me, it's until next time.